Welcome back. In this section here, we're going to be talking about part 4, fiat currencies going to zero, where I think a lot of people are under the impression that over the next, I don't know, 10, 20 years, a lot of the fiat currencies are going to be disappearing. So let's go over some of this right now. In here, we're also going to talk about the history of paper dollars in this country. I'm going to talk about the frog jumping to the wall, also known as the asymptotic equation. I covered Gresham's law. I'm not sure I still have that in here, but I covered it before. And all fiat is falling in tandem against real things. That is your parachuters over here on the left. I saw this on Twitter yesterday, so I forget who posted it. I see these great things on Twitter, and then I forget who posted it and where I saw it. So my apologies if I stole this idea from you, but I'm not claiming this is my own original idea. But the concept here is that one day you see the DXY, they say that, oh, the dollar got stronger against the euro, and the next day the euro is stronger against the yen, and all these things, it just doesn't really matter because all of these things are kind of falling at the same time against gold and silver and the like. So in this country, 100 years ago, cash was interchangeable with gold. So I may mention this in an earlier part where this was a gold certificate. You could take the $20 bill, slap it down at the bank, and get a gold ounce back. Today, it is unbacked and requires no financial energy to create it, or very little. And maybe this is like 10 cents to create a dollar bill or a $100 bill. So what I was suggesting was that this fiat currency will distort the system. And Steve Santangelo did point out this concept, so this is not a unique concept that I'm bringing up. Money lent by banks into the system was dependent on deposits into the bank, the fractional reserve stuff, and that allows for artificial growth, but at times maybe it was like a 30 to 1 or a 51 ratio. At other times maybe it was 10 to 1. So fractional lending has been around for quite some time, but how are we now with the value of with the dollar going to zero? Like as we made mention, the dollar used to be backed by 100% gold. I think it was 150 years or so. But the dollar was a receipt for the money, not the money itself. And nowadays you see the Federal Reserve note, and they call that money, but it's not money. And the dollar was more simplistic medium of exchange. For those of you who are not gold and silver bugs that are accidentally running into this for the first time, gold and silver are defined in our Constitution as money, nothing else. There is no such thing as the Federal Reserve in our Constitution. And the Federal Reserve is a private institution that prints up dollar bills right now. So the dollar was later backed by 40% after Bretton Woods Accord in 1944. The dollar is no longer pegged to gold in 1971. The 1970s then, after this happened, saw massive amounts of inflation, where gold went up 24x and silver went up 29x. There was a whole bunch of things that went up. I was born in 1975, so I didn't remember any of this stuff. I'd seen a lot of things that showed between 1971 and 1979, gold, silver, and oil all went up around 16x or so. I think that was Steve Santangelo as well. So I'm trying to give credit where it was due. But up until 1980 at the peaks, you could see silver went up 29x. Now, this whole fun thing about the asymptotic equation and how the dollar is disappearing. I remember this from 10th grade. Thank you, Mrs. Paul, for this. There was a problem that was asked to the class. If a frog was 6 feet away from the wall, and every single time he jumped to the wall, he was jumping half the distance, how many times would it take for him to touch the wall if every jump was half the distance? So, I mean, it doesn't take you very long to work out the math that it's a fraction that the first time it's 6 to 3, and then 3 to 1.5, and then 1.5 to 0.75, and the math starts. And if you plot this out, this is an asymptotic equation. It approaches zero. It never touches zero. So the frog, in theory, will never touch the wall, but it will just be like billionths of an inch from the wall. So it will look like it touches it, but it won't touch. So if you look at the value of the dollar in gold grams from 1971 to present, this is a chart that I did myself. Look at the high quality of it. It looks very similar to this, doesn't it? Yeah, how about that? So what you end up seeing is that the value of the dollar has decreased. I think it was something like 95%, 95, 97% since the year 1971. So if the fiat dollars are only useful if they can buy gold, does this frighten holders of fiat currencies? And this was something that I talked about. Rafi Farber talked about Misey's regression theorem, where basically the concept is the only reason that the fiat dollars have any value is that you can actually buy gold with them. And then someday this number becomes so small and the value, maybe they say, well, I don't really want to give you gold for fiat dollars unless you give me, I don't know, give me 8,000 fiat dollars so I can pay off my mortgage, or 20,000 fiat dollars so I can pay off my mortgage. You give me $1 million, I'll give you an ounce of gold because then I can pay off my debts. That's how you end up essentially making fiat dollars worthless. If you cannot buy gold with fiat dollars, then you won't be able to buy anything else with fiat dollars. But if you look at this as well, all fiat currencies are approaching zero at different rates. Now, if you take a look at all these currencies, all of these things look like this if you reverse them and price them in gold over the last 50 years or so. So what this will tell you is that at some point, eventually, this stuff will go into hyperinflation. Right now, we're starting to see inflation, which they call transitory, but I bet you it was transitory to start with in Venezuela. Now, if you take this asymptotic equation and you kind of stand it on its side, then you get that parabolic looking hockey stick move up. Okay, so this is what happened with the Venezuela bolivar. Their money supply just exploded, and there was all kinds of problems in Venezuela with their socialist policies and the like that caused a lot of this. And I don't want to get into politics here, but long story short is that this is kind of what our chart is starting to look like. Now, they stopped doing the M2 money charts. I think it was every week. I think now they do something every month. But one of the big takeaways from this is like all of the 40% of all the U.S. dollars created in existence have been created in the last year. All of the 40% of all of the U.S. dollars created have been created in the last year. I've seen something else that was 25%. Another one said 30%. That being said, is that there's been a lot of money printing in the last year or so, based with COVID. Now, some people will like to hit me up in the comments with, well, it's not exactly money printing because they put it in reserves for the banks and the banks can lend it out. Well, this is a little bit different because in this country, they're sending dollars digitally to people as part of the stimulus. So a lot of these trillions of dollars are going directly to the people, where in 2008 to 2011 in that area, a lot of that excess liquidity was there for banks in case they had liquidity problems. And if you look at the Great Depression, one of the issues that they had with that, and I'm no historian or whatever, so correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the issues that they ran into was when the bank runs were happening was there was a lot of liquidity issues. And I think what they were trying to do with the problems of the housing market in this country during that period of time was they wanted to provide as much liquidity as was needed to get through a rough time. Well, right now, there's liquidity coming from the rafters, and instead of staying in the banking system, it's now going out to the people. And they're calling it transitory, and I get where they're coming from with that, because if you're looking at year-over-year prices, everything kind of dropped down in March of 2020, and if you're measuring year over year, it looks like something's 50%, 100% higher. Well, everything's looking like it's 100% higher. And that stuff will all normalize as time goes on, and you go year over year, that year over year is going to decrease. So that all being said is the problems that you're starting to see have to do with labor and supply chain issues. And that, I believe, is what's going to be the true engine of issues here, because it's not necessarily that there's too little copper, it's that there's too much cash. And what you're having is an exploding amount of cash that is then competing for a finite number of resources, which drives up the prices of all of these commodities, all of the asset prices. So if people want to complain about housing prices going up too high, it's not necessarily that these houses became more valuable by that much. It's that the people who can afford a $2.2 million house at Laguna Beach that's one bedroom and it's 700 some square feet or whatever that was, who can afford that? I looked it up on realtor.com. It was something like $10,000 a month of a mortgage payment. You have to be stupid rich in order to buy that 700 square foot house. So those people are also a massive beneficiary of a lot of this excess liquidity. And with that, those who do not own things, and I talked about those 3 storage classes, if you do not have your financial jewels put into those storage classes, you will be left behind with an inflationary situation. And this is part of what it looks like the strategy here is to try and inflate our way out of debt. I talked about this in other videos with interest, and I'm not going to go into it too much, but what these hockey stick moves look like is if you have a bunch of people that you're paying pensions to and you're paying out of you're paying out the pensions, Medicare, Medicaid in this country, and you have these fixed costs. Well, if you just inflate the monetary supply up, now all of a sudden the people that were getting $1,000 a month or whatever, or $3,000 a month, that now only buys you groceries for a week or a day. So when you inflate that monetary supply, those that are on fixed incomes, like our elderly, are going to be suffering tremendously from this. And that's another lesson that I didn't necessarily put in these notes here, but when you're inflating your way out of the monetary supply, anybody that has fixed income from these sources are going to get left behind. That is also another lesson that's going to be learned in all of this. So some of the conclusions of using the fiat notes here: with trillions being printed, those holding this will be wiped out completely, because that value of your dollar, that value over time evaporates. Now there's a huge drop off in the 70s here with this, but the point is that over a fixed amount of time, this will go to zero. And those who do not own stuff in asset classes could be significantly wiped out by asset price inflation. So if you owned a house going into this whole situation, you're okay. If you're waiting a year, 2-3 years to buy a house, the prices of houses could go up by 10x. On the flip side of that is there's quite a distinct possibility that the deflationists are very correct with this, where all of these inflationary pressures and the interest rates that need to go up are going to cause a significant crash. And when this crash happens, it's going to be significantly deflationary for a short period of time. And this could take your houses down by 50% of value. It could take your stocks down by 80% of the value, as according to what David Hunter says. I think he says 85%. That being said, is that in the short term with this inflation, the interest rates in theory should come up to meet it. And with that, it can really cause problems with our ability to service the debt. And with that, you're running into all kinds of problems with asset values. And at that point in time, if you're sitting there with excess cash, that might be a good time to buy. So we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if this is just going to keep melting up like this. I mean, if you look at Venezuela's stock exchange, when the hyperinflation started, it just kept going up and up and up. It never pulled back down on a crash. However, the big difference is we are also the world's reserve currency. So no one really knows how this is going to turn out. With Gresham's law here, the bad money drives out good, and those who have fake money will have no money at all. And I say that because the fiat that's unbacked, I mean, you see the pictures. I don't have it here, but you see the pictures of the guy from 100 years ago or whatever in Weimar walking around with this huge thing of paper currency, a wheelbarrow full of paper currency, probably to buy groceries. So anybody that's stuck with this paper currency through this whole situation is going to be left holding the bag with these paper pieces of nothing And anybody that has things, gold, silver, jewelry, cars, houses, stocks, even cryptos, anybody that has things, all of these values will inflate up with the larger monetary supply. So the big conclusion here is that all of these fiat notes are going to be going to zero. And the lessons for the next generation 20, 30, 40 years from now is that anything, any kind of unbacked currency, whether it's the newest crypto that you want to talk about, anything that is unbacked will eventually poison your system through dysregulation, which takes us into the last chapter here.